The bride demanded a maid kneel in front of hundreds of guests, but seconds later, the groom shattered the wedding with 5 words that no one saw coming. The golden light of late afternoon spilled across the garden, painting every white linen table in shades of honey and pearl. Crystal chandeliers dangled from the oak branches above, their prisms catching the sun and scattering it like fragments of a dream. The scent of roses mixed with the tang of champagne, while violins played a soft prelude that fluttered across the lawn like a whisper. Guests in silk dresses and tailored suits laughed in low voices, their conversations layered with the soft clink of cutlery. It was a scene curated to perfection, the kind of wedding that could grace the cover of a society magazine. And then, in the shadows between perfection and service, there was Maya. Her apron was crisp, her posture practiced, her movements precise. At 27, she had worked enough events to understand the choreography of invisibility. Her smile was polite, but never intrusive, her footsteps careful not to echo against the stone tiles. She carried herself with the grace of someone who knew how to fade into the backdrop while still holding the room together. Every napkin folded, every glass refilled, every vase aligned just so, Maya made the beauty seamless. But to the guests, she was background, the maid in black slacks and polished flats, a name tag, not a name. She had just adjusted a tall crystal vase filled with ivory roses, nudging it an inch to catch the light better when Charlotte Alden's voice tore through the air. "You are just a lowly maid." The words cracked like glass dropped onto marble. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks froze halfway to lips. Every eye turned toward the long banquet table where Maya stood, hands still at the vase's rim. Charlotte's satin gown shimmered in the sunlight. Pearl embroidery glittering like armor, her chin tilted high, eyes sharp with disdain. "Look what you've done," Charlotte snapped, her manicured fingers stabbing the air toward the centerpiece. "Is it so hard to do one thing right? This is a wedding, not a church potluck." Maya's breath slowed. The vase hadn't tipped. Nothing had spilled. The roses stood tall, dignified as ever. Still, the sting of the words pressed against her chest. She had been here before, in restaurants, in ballrooms, in places where money polished cruelty into a kind of sport. But today, there was no veil of politeness. The insult had been flung raw, public, undeniable. Before Maya could respond, Margaret Alden, the mother of the bride, stepped forward with lips pursed like she'd tasted something sour. "That's not how we do things here," she said, her tone icy, each word dipped in disdain. "You people should know better than to touch what you can't afford." Her gaze swept Maya's skin like a branding iron. "This is why we ask the agency to be more selective. Appearances matter." Maya's hand hovered above the vase. "You people." The phrase coiled in the air, heavy, unmistakable. A hush gripped the garden, as though even the oaks leaned in to listen. Guests shifted uneasily in their seats. Somewhere, glass clinked against glass. The nervous stutter of someone's trembling hand. Charlotte folded her arms across her glittering bodice. "Don't act like you don't know what we mean. You're just background. That's your role." Her eyes narrowed with venomous delight. "If you want to keep your little paycheck, maybe you should drop to your knees right now and apologize. Publicly." The silence that followed was suffocating. Maya felt the weight of every eye pressing against her. 1,000 unspoken orders, centuries of expectations, all demanding the same thing. Bow, make yourself smaller, disappear. Her throat tightened, but her hands did not shake. She drew in a long, steady breath. "I've already apologized," she said, her voice calm, low, and unwavering. Her eyes met Charlotte's without flinching. "I'll fix the centerpiece, but I won't kneel." The words fell like a stone dropped into still water. Gasps rippled outward through the crowd. Someone's wineglass slipped from their fingers and shattered against the flagstone. The violins faltered, their melody collapsing into silence. Charlotte's cheeks flamed crimson, her lips trembling with rage. Margaret's eyes widened, as if scandal itself had been born at that moment. And Maya, standing tall in her apron, name tag crooked, the scent of roses still on her hands, felt something ancient stir within her. She had not raised her voice, she had not lashed out, she had simply refused. And yet the world around her shifted, irreversibly. The silence that followed Maya's refusal didn't end, it thickened. It pressed down on the garden like a storm cloud moments before it splits with thunder. Guests shifted in their chairs, the scrape of metal against stone sounding louder than it should. The air carried the faint perfume of roses, but beneath it was something sharp, acrid, tension. Charlotte's face had gone a dangerous shade of pink, her jaw tightening so much that the tendons in her neck stood out. She had been humiliated, not by a mistake in flowers, but by defiance from someone she considered beneath her. Her voice trembled with rage as she spat. "How dare you!" The pearls on her gown shimmered like shards of ice. Before Maya could answer, Margaret's hand landed firmly on her daughter's arm, steadying her. But the mother's voice was worse, silken, calculated, the kind of cruelty sharpened over decades. "This is what happens when the staff forgets their place," she said, her eyes never leaving Maya. "They start believing dignity is something they can afford." The crowd murmured again, some turning away in discomfort, others leaning in, hungry for spectacle. It was no longer just about a vase. It was about hierarchy, class, and skin, and every person knew it. Maya's chest rose and fell with a deliberate slowness. She wanted to look away, to melt into the shadows, to disappear into the hum of clinking glasses and polished silver. But she couldn't. Not this time. Something deep in her, older than her job, older than this wedding, refused to bend. Then a new voice cut through, low and commanding. "What did you just say?" The words carried like a bell, silencing even the whisperers. From behind the floral archway, Grant Kingsley emerged. His tuxedo jacket hung open, his bow tie loosened as though he had grown impatient with appearances. His tall frame seemed to darken the space around him, his face unreadable, but his eyes, sharp, gray with a flicker of storm, locked on Charlotte. "Darling," Charlotte stammered, relief rushing into her tone. "She disrespected me, right in front of everyone. Can you imagine? She refused." Grant raised a hand, cutting her words in half. "And you disrespected my father." The garden shifted again, the weight of his statement crashing into the silence like a wave. Maya blinked, Margaret's lips parted, caught off guard. Charlotte froze, confusion spreading across her face. "My father," Grant repeated, stepping closer, his voice steady but vibrating with restrained fury, "is a black man, the man who raised me, the man you invited to sit in the front row today." His gaze swept across the stunned audience. "When you talk down to Maya like that, when you call her you people, you're not just insulting her, you're insulting him, and you're insulting me." Gasps rippled outward, louder now, carrying shock and disbelief. Maya's pulse hammered in her ears. She hadn't expected a word, a glance, nothing from the groom, certainly not this. Charlotte's lips trembled as she tried to regain control. "Grant, you're overreacting. She was careless. No." His voice cut sharper than any blade. "I'm seeing clearly for the first time." He stepped closer still, towering over Charlotte now, his shadow falling across her satin and pearls. "If this is how you see the people who hold this day together, if this is how you see my family, then you never saw me at all." The murmurs rose into a restless thrum. Someone whispered, "He's not going through with it, is he?" Another voice hushed them. Margaret's composure cracked, her cheeks drained of color. "Grant," she interjected with brittle authority, "this isn't the place for— This is public," he snapped, his voice deep, unflinching. "You both made it public." He turned, addressing the rows of guests now watching with rapt, horrified attention. "I will not marry into a family that looks at people like Maya and sees less than. I will not stand next to someone who believes skin color determines worth." Charlotte staggered back a step, her hands trembling against the folds of her gown. "You don't mean this." Her voice cracked, desperation seeping through. But Grant did not hesitate. Slowly, with deliberate clarity, he reached for his hand. He pulled the ring from his finger and held it for a long, quiet moment. The sunlight caught on the diamonds, scattering across the stunned faces around them. Then, with a controlled exhale, he dropped it into Charlotte's trembling hand. "This wedding," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the garden, "is off." The air fractured, gasps, cries, the scrape of chairs, the shatter of composure. The violinists, unsure, lowered their bows. Guests stood, some leaving immediately, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Charlotte's world collapsed in her clenched fist, the ring heavy in her palm. Margaret looked around wildly, but no one came to her defense. And in the center of it all, Maya stood motionless, the vase steady at her fingertips, her breath calm despite the storm. She hadn't shouted, she hadn't begged, she had simply refused to kneel. And somehow that refusal had turned a perfect wedding into a reckoning no one could ever forget. The garden, once a stage for elegance and laughter, now trembled with chaos. The chandeliers strung through the oaks no longer twinkled as symbols of grandeur. They swayed lightly in the breeze, throwing fractured light across faces that could not mask their unease. Guests whispered in frantic tones, the words off and canceled, buzzing like hornets through the air. The violinists lowered their instruments entirely, one bow snapping under the nervous grip of a trembling hand. The hush was not silent, it was jagged, full of sharp breaths, the occasional sob, and the stunned disbelief of a room watching its own perfection unravel. Charlotte stood paralyzed, her fists clutching the ring so tightly it left an imprint on her palm. The satin folds of her gown no longer shimmered with triumph but clung to her like chains. "Grant," she whispered, voice cracking, "you can't mean this. Not here. Not in front of... In front of them?" His voice cut through hers, louder now, carrying across every row. "Yes, especially in front of them, because if I let this moment pass, then I am complicit, and I will not live as a coward." The words didn't just pierce Charlotte, they struck the crowd too. A woman near the front row clutched her pearls with a faint gasp. A man shifted uncomfortably in his designer suit, tugging at his collar as though it strangled him. Even Margaret, so sharp and polished just minutes ago, faltered. Her lips opened and closed without sound, her authority bleeding away beneath the collective weight of eyes turning against her dot. And through it all, Maya remained where she stood. Her hands brushed lightly against the crystal vase, her posture neither triumphant nor submissive, only steady. She did not seek attention, yet all attention bent toward her like iron filings to a magnet. Every guest could see it. She was the pivot point, the reason the ground beneath them no longer felt certain. Charlotte's composure cracked entirely. "You're humiliating me," she screamed, the polished society veneer shattering in front of everyone. "Over her?" Her finger jabbed toward Maya, trembling with rage. "Over a maid who doesn't even belong here." Gasps erupted like sparks. Several guests rose, some in anger, others in shame. A man muttered, "Not again," as if the ugliness exposed here had been waiting to surface all along. Children clung to their mothers, sensing a shift they couldn't name. Grant didn't flinch. "You humiliated yourself," he said coldly. He turned slightly, addressing Maya, his tone softening. In a way that stunned everyone. "She stood with dignity when you demanded she kneel. That is more strength than anything I've seen at this altar." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating, but it was no longer empty. It brimmed with judgment, revelation, and something else, shame. Shame that so many had watched quietly, sipping champagne, while cruelty unfolded at their table. Margaret tried once more to regain control, her voice sharp and brittle. "Grant, let's discuss this privately. We can resolve—" "No!" His tone thundered. "You taught your daughter that wealth makes her superior. You stood silent while she tried to strip another woman of dignity. And now you think it can be smoothed away in private? This is public. It was always public." The audience shifted as though a verdict had been delivered. The ring in Charlotte's hand seemed to burn. She dropped it to the stone floor, the metallic clink echoing like a bell toll. A woman gasped. A man rose from his seat, shaking his head, muttering about ruined investments. Another grabbed his wife's arm, whispering, "We should go," before dragging her toward the exit. Charlotte lunged forward, desperate. "Please, Grant, don't do this. You'll regret it." "I already regret being blind," he answered. His jaw tightened, his gaze cutting through her like glass. "And I won't regret walking away from this. I'll regret not walking away sooner." The storm broke. Chairs scraped violently as people stood. The oaks overhead rattled with a gust of wind that sent rose petals swirling across the ground like fragments of a shattered crown. Margaret's face crumbled into something raw, anger fighting with fear. Charlotte collapsed into her chair, gown pooling around her like spilled milk, her sobs jagged and loud, ignored by the crowd already dispersing. And Maya? She stood in the wreckage of a wedding never meant for her, a quiet figure in an apron with lemon polish still clinging faintly to her hands. She had not raised her voice, not claimed the stage, yet it was her stillness, her refusal to kneel, that had turned the ceremony into an unmasking dot. As the last of the guests filtered out, murmuring disbelief into cell phones, Maya felt a strange stillness settle over her. She wasn't triumphant, she was trembling inside. But beneath that tremor was something steady, a seed planted in soil that had just been cracked open. For somewhere in the debris of broken vows and fallen petals, the air carried not just the ruin of a wedding, but the birth of a reckoning. The garden was no longer a sanctuary for vows, it was a battlefield of whispers and broken illusions. The scattered petals across the stone floor looked less like decoration and more like remnants of something slain. Dreams, reputations, masks. Guests filed out in restless waves, some muttering curses under their breath, others clutching their phones, eager to deliver the story before it even settled in their own minds. A few glanced at Maya as they passed, some with pity, others with resentment, but none could look at her for long. She had become a mirror too sharp to face. Maya inhaled slowly, her hands still lingering near the crystal vase. She had survived the worst of storms before. Quiet humiliations in corridors, whispers about girls like her when she cleared plates. But nothing like this. This was not whispered. This was loud, public, unforgiving. Her body felt rigid, her breath caught between the instinct to run and the need to stand her ground. She had not asked for this fight, yet somehow she had become its center dot. The crowd thinned. The strings of chandeliers swayed overhead, groaning slightly in the wind, their glow pale now compared to the heat of Scott. And Dale still clinging to the lawn. Then a hand touched her shoulder. Not Charlotte, not Margaret. The fingers were firm, not cruel, carrying the neutrality of authority. Miss Williams. Maya turned. Mr. Langston, the general manager of the venue, stood tall, his salt and pepper hair gleaming under the fading sunlight. He was always impeccably dressed, his voice usually smooth and measured like a metronome. But tonight, his tie sat slightly askew, and his eyes carried the weight of panic. Come with me, now. The staff station, hidden behind ivy and stone, seemed to pulse with unease. Servers huddled near the ice bins, eyes wide, mouths half open, as if words had been stolen from them. Carmen, the pastry assistant barely out of her teens, mouthed silently to Maya, "Are you okay?" Maya only gave the faintest nod as she followed Langston through the back door. Inside his office, the air smelled of leather polish and stale coffee. Posters about excellence in service hung crooked on the walls, their corporate platitudes suddenly absurd. Langston closed the door with a sharp click, folded his arms, and stared at her. For the first time in years working under him, Maya couldn't read his expression. Not anger, not compassion. Something else. A calculation. "I'm going to be honest with you," he began, his voice lower than usual. "This is a disaster." Maya's back stiffened. "I understand. Do you?" His tone wasn't cruel, but it carried an edge, as though truth itself had teeth. "The Aldens were about to sign a major contract with us, private events, recurring bookings. That's gone. My phone has been buzzing with calls from guests already. Half the county's gossip mill is sharpening its knives." Maya's voice was steady, but soft. "I didn't raise mine. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't touch her." "No," Langston said, his gaze drilling into hers. "You didn't kneel." The words hit like a gavel dot. Silence stretched. Maya's chest tightened, but she did not falter. "No, I didn't." Langston leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable. "You're one of my best workers, never late, always polished, clients like you. But now," he exhaled sharply, "now I have a problem. 2 angry women out there are telling every guest this entire wedding collapsed because of staff sabotage, because of you." Maya swallowed the lump in her throat. "So, am I fired?" He hesitated. The pause stretched too long, as if even he couldn't find the clean line between fairness and business survival. Finally, he shook his head. "Technically, no. But you're on leave, paid, for now, until this blows over." The words tasted like exile. Maya nodded once, her dignity unbroken even as her livelihood cracked beneath her. "May I collect my things?" Langston moved aside, his face softening only for a flicker. "Yes." The break room was quieter than it had ever been. Her cubby, labeled MW, held her small canvas bag worn at the straps. As she reached for it, she heard sneakers squeak across the linoleum. Marcus, the barback with tired eyes and dreadlocks that always slipped loose from their ties, stood there. His chest heaved with the adrenaline of someone who had witnessed history. "I saw the whole thing," he said, voice low but burning. "That wasn't just rude, that was hate." Maya said nothing, but her stillness answered. "I've been waiting for someone to speak up. They tell us, always, stay quiet, smile, nod, clear the glasses, take the tips. I didn't think it would be you, but when you didn't kneel..." His voice cracked and he shook his head. "I've never felt prouder." Her lips pressed into the faintest curve. "And I wasn't trying to make a scene." "You didn't," he insisted. "You made a stand." She held his gaze, this young man barely old enough to drink, yet already carved by the weight of invisibility. And for the first time that day, warmth stirred in her chest. Not triumph, not relief, just the flicker of connection. But before she could answer, another voice carried from the doorway. "Maya." She turned. Grant. The tuxedo jacket gone, his white dress shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, his tie discarded. His face bore the wreckage of what had just imploded, yet his eyes, still storm gray, held clarity. The crowd outside might have been chaos, but here he looked like a man who had already made peace with his choice. "May I speak with you?" His voice was low, careful, almost reverent. Marcus stepped back, eyes darting between them, then nodded once and slipped out. Grant took a slow step closer, his throat working as if every word carried weight. I just needed to say, thank you. You stood when you didn't have to, and I saw it. I'll be honest, if you hadn't, I might have gone through with it. I might have ignored the voice in my head telling me something wasn't right. Maya's breath caught. She hadn't expected gratitude, not from him, not tonight. You would have found out sooner or later, she said quietly. Maybe, he admitted, but not in time. The room seemed to shrink around them, the world outside fading into muffled whispers and the scrape of retreating chairs. Here, in the dim light of a back office, stood a maid with her apron still tied tight, and a groom with his vows shattered. And for the first time, both saw each other not as backdrop and centerpiece, but as people who had chosen not to kneel, not to lies, not to appearances, not to cruelty. And outside, the storm of consequences gathered. The morning broke without mercy. Sunlight spilled through the thin curtains of Maya's small apartment, but it didn't bring warmth. It brought exposure. Her phone buzzed like a trapped insect on the nightstand, its glow relentless, a drumbeat of attention she had not asked for. She rolled over with heavy limbs, her body still sore from hours of standing, but her mind sharper than it had ever been. The words returned unbidden, echoing in her skull. You're just a lowly maid. And her reply, steady as stone. I won't kneel. 50-3 missed notifications blinked across her screen. Messages from numbers she didn't know, some from coworkers, some from strangers. She tapped one open. Carmen, the pastry assistant, typing in a frenzy. Girl, you're everywhere. Check the news. I swear I just saw you on TV. Her stomach tightened. She turned on the television, the screen flickering to life just as a local anchor's voice cut through the static. And in breaking news, the highly anticipated Alden Kingsley wedding was abruptly canceled yesterday in what eyewitnesses are calling an explosive confrontation. Cell phone footage obtained by our station shows the groom, Grant Kingsley, publicly calling off the ceremony after the bride and her mother were accused of verbally attacking a catering staff member, identified as Maya Williams. The video played, shaky, grainy, captured by a guest's trembling hand, but unmistakable. Maya saw herself on the screen, her apron slightly crooked, her hands brushing the vase, her voice calm as she said the words she had lived her whole life to say, I won't kneel. The camera swung to Charlotte, her face twisted in fury, then to Grant, his tall frame imposing as he thundered, this wedding is off. The clip ended abruptly, but not before capturing the gasps, the murmurs, the shock. Maya's throat tightened. She wanted to turn the television off, to curl back into bed, but her phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from Marcus. They're talking about you on the radio, and not in a bad way. She opened social media, and the floodgates burst. A hashtag blinked at her from every corner. #just a lowly maid. It had spread overnight like wildfire. Some posts were cruel. She ruined a rich girl's life for attention. Another angry black woman playing victim. Others, though, swelled with gratitude. She didn't kneel. My mother worked 30 years as a hotel maid. She would have cried to see this. Dignity is worth more than diamonds. Maya Williams stood for all of us. Her breath caught as she scrolled through comment after comment. The ugliness stung, but the solidarity burned brighter. She wasn't invisible anymore, and that terrified her as much as it steadied her. A knock at the door startled her. She froze, her heart racing, then opened it cautiously. On the threshold stood Ruth, her elderly neighbor with wise eyes and hands that carried the memory of 1,000 kitchens. She held a paper bag filled with food, collard greens, fried catfish, cornbread wrapped in foil. I figured you wouldn't cook for yourself today, Ruth said, her tone calm but her eyes sharp. So I brought lunch. Maya stepped aside, her throat thickening. You didn't have to. Honey, Ruth cut her off, setting the bag down on the table. People are tearing each other apart on the news, but you gave folks a reason to stand a little taller. That ain't nothing. They sat together at the tiny kitchen table. Ruth dabbed her napkin, then leaned in. The Aldens are panicking, already lost 2 sponsors, and word is Charlotte's father is distancing himself. Their little empire is crumbling faster than yesterday's cake. Maya didn't smile. She couldn't. Schadenfreude tasted bitter, not sweet. I didn't want their ruin, she said softly. No, Ruth agreed. But you demanded your dignity. And sometimes, baby, dignity makes castles fall. Before Maya could reply, her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a text. It was a voicemail, left by a woman whose voice cracked through static and tears. My daughter works in hospitality, the stranger said, her words quivering. She's been through what you went through. Thank you for not kneeling. Thank you. Maya's breath hitched. She pressed the phone to her chest and closed her eyes. The weight of the world felt heavier now, not lighter. She had become something she had never intended. A symbol, but symbols come with shadows. That afternoon, as she scrolled through the news, her chest tightened at another headline. Maya Williams, heroine or homewrecker? The duality was vicious. Some praised her as brave. Others painted her as the villain who destroyed a wedding for her pride. By dusk, her name was on podcasts, talk shows, even political commentary. Some voices tried to twist her refusal into arrogance. Others called her a movement. And in the middle of it all, she was just one woman, sitting in a small apartment, her hands still smelling faintly of roses and lemon polish, wondering how long she could withstand being seen. As night fell, a final knock came. When she opened the door, Grant stood there, not the groom in silk and diamonds, but a man stripped of illusions. His sleeves rolled, his tie gone, his eyes heavy, but certain. Maya, he said, his voice low. I'm sorry to come uninvited, but I needed to say something. She hesitated, then nodded once. Go on. I didn't walk away from a wedding because of you. I walked away because of what I believe, but if you hadn't stood, I might never have found the courage. Her heart raced, but she didn't speak. He took a step closer. I run a hospitality group. We're opening a new concept, community-based, locally staffed, and I want you on the leadership team, not as a maid, as a manager, to help me build a place where no one will ever be asked to kneel again. Maya's breath caught. The television inside still blared her name. Social media buzzed with fire. The city churned with judgment. And here on her doorstep stood the man who had shattered his own future to defend her dignity, offering her the chance to build something entirely new. Her hands trembled as she whispered, You're serious? His gaze didn't waver. Dead serious. The world outside howled with noise, but between them, the silence brimmed with something powerful. Possibility. Snow hadn't yet fallen, but the air carried that unmistakable hush, the kind that warns the world change is coming. The weeks after the wedding had unspooled like a film Maya hadn't agreed to star in. Her face appeared on news tickers, her voice quoted in articles she had never spoken to. At first, she wanted to retreat, to fold herself back into invisibility, but every time she tried, another message arrived. A letter from a hotel janitor in Detroit, an email from a nurse in Atlanta, a photo of a teenage girl holding a handwritten sign that read, I won't kneel either. It wasn't fame, it was responsibility. And Maya wasn't sure which terrified her more. Now she stood in the skeleton of a restaurant in downtown Austin, exposed brick walls lined with floor plans taped to the glass. The name had been chosen, Upraise. The word was etched on a plaque leaning against the entryway, waiting to be mounted. Below it, a smaller inscription, founded on dignity. Inspired by Maya Williams. Her chest tightened every time she read it. She had once been background noise in white linens and glassware. Now she was being asked to be the cornerstone of something new. And she couldn't decide if that was justice or just another burden disguised as opportunity. Grant walked beside her, sleeves rolled, phone buzzing endlessly in his pocket. His confidence wasn't the smooth arrogance of a groom-to-be anymore. It was tempered, sharpened by loss and by truth. He gestured toward the open space in the center of the restaurant. I'm thinking a community table here, he said. Long, family style, a place for strangers to sit together. Thoughts? Maya studied the sunlight spilling across the floorboards. That would be powerful. Shared meals, shared stories. Feels right. Grant smiled faintly. You always cut straight through the noise. But the noise wasn't going anywhere. Outside, reporters circled. On social media, the hashtag still surged, but it had split into two camps. Those who saw Maya as a beacon, and those who painted her as a destroyer. Each day, her name was dragged through both mud and gold, and though she had learned to stand tall under humiliation, standing tall under adoration was somehow harder. That night, she stayed late after the crew left. Alone in the half-finished dining room, she sat at a bare wooden table, notebook open. She wasn't writing policies or PR responses, she was writing values. 3 sentences on the first page, written in her grandmother's steadying wisdom. We don't kneel to cruelty, we rise to dignity. We serve. With pride, never shame. The words steadied her. But suspense was never far away. 2 days later, a package arrived. No return address. Inside, a flash drive and a note scrawled in jagged handwriting. She hasn't changed. Thought you should see for yourself. Marcus plugged it into his laptop while Maya stood behind him, her arms folded tight. The grainy footage flickered. Whitney Alden, her voice shrill and venomous, caught on a phone camera in some parking lot. "I don't care what that maid is doing now," she hissed. "This won't last. Her kind always overreaches. They'll turn on each other like they always do." Marcus slammed the laptop shut, fury sparking in his eyes. "We leak this. She's finished." But Maya's voice was calm, even colder than silence. "No, let her rot in her own venom. I'm not here to bury anyone. I'm here to build." And yet, without her hand, karma moved. Within a week, Whitney's family businesses hemorrhaged investors. Designers cut ties. The Alden name soured in high society. For every stone thrown at Maya, another stone cracked the Alden's foundation. Still, comma. Maya felt no triumph, only weariness. She stood one evening on the roof of her apartment, Ruth at her side, sipping mint tea. "Do you ever wonder," Maya whispered, "what if I had knelt that day, said sorry, lowered my head?" Ruth's gaze was fierce in the dark. "Then you wouldn't be the woman who's about to open a door for a whole city. That girl who would have knelt? She's gone, and good riddance." The grand opening of Uprise arrived beneath amber skies. People lined the street not because of ads or gimmicks, but because word had traveled like gospel. A restaurant where dignity wasn't negotiable. Inside, Maya moved through the space with grace, greeting busboys, chefs, mothers with children, and elders with canes. No one whispered about background roles. Every person had a seat. Then, just as the speeches wound down, Grant lifted a glass of sweet tea. To dignity not given, but chosen. To the woman who reminded us all that standing tall isn't about posture, it's about purpose. The room erupted, applause rolling like thunder. But before Maya could respond, the doors opened. A woman stepped inside, head bowed, hands clutching a bouquet of sunflowers. "Whitney Alden." The crowd gasped, cameras lifted, the suspense was suffocating. Whitney's eyes found Maya, wet with shame. She set the flowers on the community table and whispered, her voice breaking, "I didn't come for forgiveness, only to thank you for making me see who I was and who I wasn't." Maya didn't speak, not right away. She looked at the flowers, bright and golden against the wood, then back at the woman who had once demanded her humiliation. The silence burned hotter than any words. Finally, she said softly, "This table is for everyone, even those still learning how to sit." The applause that followed wasn't thunder. It was a wave, steady, cleansing dot. And for the first time, Maya realized this wasn't just her story anymore. It belonged to every maid who had swallowed insults, every busboy erased by silence, every ancestor forced to kneel. The turning point had become a turning table, one where everyone, yes everyone, could rise.